Today, I'm going to be sharing with you my personal journey with sleep training my 6-month-old baby. This was a few years ago, and I'm going to share with you some of the questions I struggled with, some of the mistakes I made along the way, and I hope that it makes you feel a little bit less alone if you are wrestling with this question of whether or not to sleep train your baby. And if you decide to go for it, I hope it makes you feel a little bit more prepared. Hi, I'm Chelsea, creator of Tuned In Motherhood, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a postpartum doula, a certified pediatric sleep consultant, and a mama of one almost 3-year-old girl and a little boy here on the way. I'm so glad you're here, and I hope that you will consider pressing subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss any of the tips or encouragement that's coming your way. Okay, let's jump into the 5 mistakes that I made when I was sleep training my own baby. This was before I was a sleep consultant, by the way, just for the record. These are the 5 mistakes that I made sleep training my own baby when she was 6 months about 2 years ago. The first mistake that I made is that I thought that sleep training meant that I also had to night wean. And I wasn't ready for that. I didn't feel like my baby was ready for that. I wasn't emotionally ready to night wean, but I thought that was part of the deal. As a sleep consultant, I now know that creating independent sleep habits and helping teach your baby to fall asleep on their own and back to sleep on their own is a totally different process than night weaning. I had so much anxiety around whether or not she was ready to night wean, and I let that drive pretty much all of my decision making around whether or not I wanted to sleep train. The second mistake that I made was that I rushed the whole thing. I'm someone who thinks about making a decision for a long time, and then I kind of get caught up in that process and overwhelmed by it, and then I just decide and move forward no matter what, which, sometimes ends up pretty well and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it just wasn't right. It didn't feel right. I didn't feel ready, and it didn't go as well as it could have. I ended up getting a book from the library. It was the only sleep training book they had that day, which, what was I thinking? And I read the book while my husband was at work that day, and he came home and I told him, this is what we're doing, and that's what we did. I wish instead I had spent a little bit more time thinking about what I wanted out of this process, what my baby needed out of this process, what we could handle as a family as we were doing it, and I wish that I had some support. My husband was very supportive. I wish I had support from an expert like a sleep consultant. The third mistake that I made was that I believed the messages that I was reading online that were telling me that sleep training my baby would harm her. I know now that this is not true. I even knew then that I didn't believe that it was true, but I was still taking those messages in and I was really internalizing them. At this point, I was not yet a postpartum doula or a sleep consultant, so I hadn't had the experience that I have now, and I didn't have all of the knowledge that I had now, but I had read quite a few books about infant sleep, and I had a pretty good working knowledge of infant sleep and, setting up those good routines and all that, and I believed that that was the right path for our family. In my heart of hearts, I believed that that was going to serve our family well. And I also was still taking in these messages that sleep training was bad. It was going to harm your baby. And it was really hard to overcome those. I knew my baby really well. I decided to become a student of my baby when she was born, and I observed her like crazy, and I felt like I knew her cues and her needs, and I felt like I was really in tune with her and with what she needed. I knew that allowing her some space to figure out this new skill would benefit her. I knew that I could follow through on a plan if I felt good about it. I knew, most importantly, that better sleep would benefit our entire family in a really big way. And I still doubted that it was the right thing to do because of all these messages that I was taking in, and not only like seeing them and reading them, but really internalizing them. The fourth mistake that I made was that I started this plan, which was basically like a modified Ferber method. I started this plan with major lingering hesitation. I did not feel confident. I did not feel prepared. I wasn't even convinced that this was the right method for us to use. And so because of that, I went into the process with questions, like logistical questions about how to respond when my baby started to cry in the middle of the night, how to handle it if she truly was hungry. And I also started it with these big insecurities, and it was hard to follow through on a plan that I didn't fully believe in at that point. And looking back, I can see now that if I had a better understanding of why the plan suggested what it did, if I had a better understanding about how to merge what the plan said with my real life and not just like follow the plan, black and white, no matter what, follow all the rules to a T, I think it would have gone a lot more smoothly. Mistake number 5, and this is probably the biggest one, is that I didn't believe my baby could do it. I doubted that she could overcome this. In her case, it was like a very strong sleep association with the pacifier. She needed that pacifier to go to sleep, and I didn't believe that she could fall asleep without it. Just to give you some context here, she was falling asleep really well at bedtime. She pretty much always had since she was a newborn. We always put her down awake and she could fall asleep with her pacifier. And at this point in her development, she was about 6 months old, and that pacifier would pop out of her mouth and she would need it to fall back asleep. And I didn't see the connection as clearly as I do now. And that's okay, because when you're in it and you're the parent and you're just feeling that sleep deprivation, it's hard to zoom out and see what's actually going on. So it was just a really strong sleep association with the pacifier. And she couldn't, she was 6 months old. She couldn't get it and put it in her mouth reliably. She could sometimes, but not all the time. And so I would sleep on the floor next to her bed sometimes before we decided to sleep train. And I would just make sure that she had that pacifier in her mouth. If it popped out, if she started crying at all, I would just be right there to give it back to her. And I couldn't understand, I don't know why, I couldn't understand that was the key thing that was holding us back. And I couldn't understand that she could do it. Babies are amazing, and they pick up on new routines and new habits and new ways of falling asleep really well most of the time. And I wish that someone had told me that she would be okay, that she could do it, even if I didn't understand how that would happen. If you're deciding whether or not to sleep train your baby, here are some questions I want you asking yourself and some work you can do on your end to make sure that if you decide to go for it, that you're fully prepared and feel good about your decision. Number 1, am I ready to commit to a plan and follow through? Number 2, is my partner on board and willing to help me through this process, if you have one? 3, what work do I need to do to make sure that we're set up for success? That might be setting up a sleep environment that's conducive for infant sleep, like nice dark room, around 68 to 72 degrees, white noise, whatever that looks like for you. Those are kind of the 3 things that I always suggest. But it can vary child to child, family to family, and it can obviously depend on like your physical space that you have to work with. Making sure that your baby's schedule is developmentally appropriate. They're not overtired or undertired. Just making sure that they're gonna be the right amount of sleep to fall asleep independently when it comes time to actually do the sleep training process. Identifying any sleep associations that might be getting in the way of them falling asleep without your assistance. So sleep associations can be things like nursing or bottle feeding to sleep, rocking to sleep, pacifier to sleep, as was the case with my daughter. Anything that you do that your baby needs every time to fall asleep. And finally, what sleep training method feels good for me, for my baby, for my family, and what method do I feel comfortable with enough to follow through and remain consistent with over time. I hope that this video has helped you think through some of the logistics and some of the mindset work that goes into sleep training your baby, and I hope you enjoyed hearing some of my story. I hope it was helpful and valuable for you. If it was, please subscribe and hit that notification button so that I can continue to give you tips and encouragement along the way.